What's up, FFR listeners? This is your engineer, Rob Pera. Just giving you a quick heads up that it's going to sound a little different than usual today. Emily forgot to hit record on her side of the recording, so we have to use the Zoom backup audio for her. Just pretend that she's outside Anita's window screaming her opinions. All right, enjoy.
Hey listeners, you know we've got a Patreon, right? Where supporters get early access to all our podcasts, bonus episodes, discounts on merch, and access to the Feminist Frequency Discord? Well, now you do. Get all this fun stuff while supporting our show at patreon.com/femfreak. That's FEMFREQ.
I would have gotten so high at a party in graduate school and listened to every bomo out of this idiot's mouth, and I would have fallen in love, and he wouldn't have had any time for me, and I would have just been obsessed with this guy, and it would have taken me like 6 years to realize what an asshole he was.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by a woman who would literally commit murder for Tilda Swinton, Ebony Adams.
That is accurate, Anita. Tilda, if you need any wet work done, oh, that sounds even more terrible than I intended. Tilda, call me.
I feel like maybe all three of us are in that boat.
I'm
maybe
like,
we could just...
who wouldn't?
Yeah, it's exactly.
I think there may be people out there who don't have their priorities straight, and I just want to, let people know where I stand. So
can't relate.
Very special, Julie.
No, I don't think I am.
Oh no, you don't think you are.
Very normal, really.
You're not normal at all.
I feel as though I want to not live my whole life in this very privileged part of the world I come from. I want to be really aware about what's going on around me. Sorry.
We can all be sincere, but what's it all for?
The Souvenir is directed by Joanna Hogg.
Wait. You haven't even introduced...
We're doing it differently. We changed it, Carolyn. You have no say anymore.
All right. I will wait for my entrance. Don't tell anyone I'm here yet. It's fine. It's a secret. Nobody knows.
The Souvenir is director Joanna Hogg's loosely autobiographical fifth film and stars Honor Swinton Byrne, Tom Burke, Richard Ayoade, and Tilda Swinton, the person I would commit murder for. It's a contemplative, meditative coming-of-age story about Julie, a young film student working her way towards an understanding of who she is and what she wants to express through art. During the course of the film, Julie enters a relationship with Anthony, an insufferable but worldly older man who issues a laconic dismissal of her opinions every time he smokes a cigarette, which is all the fucking time. As time goes on, Julie learns some concerning facts about Anthony's life and history, which prompt her to finally release him from her life and move on. Joining us to talk about the film is FemFreak favorite and managing editor at Kotaku, CAROLYN PETIT.
Hey, everyone. I'm here.
What's
Surprise. Hi.
Carolyn had some concerns about the new order.
She was like, listen, I get top billing. Basically, it was like that meme, like, ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis. She knows the people come for Carol.
I see some things have changed around here since I left. Oh, things, okay.
It all fell apart, Carolyn.
It all
without you.
fell
Basically did.
Yeah. Well.
So.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no more intro talk. There's no nothing. We don't give a fuck about people's feelings over here.
Just cut to the chase. Just cut right
kidding.
to the chase.
But
yes.
Because
yes.
everybody loves you and regularly asks, when's Carolyn coming back on?
Yeah,
Let's take a minute and be like, hey, Carol, what's been going on in the last, between Benedetta and the Souvenir, you know?
Wow. I mean, like several hundred years between, because Benedetta takes place in like the... Zing! No, good. I mean, things are good. I live in, and I'm enjoying New York still. It's still weird because we're still living in COVID times, and I still feel like weird time to move to a new city because it certainly makes meeting new people and forming new friend groups and new communities that much more difficult. I'm not really getting the like social experience of the city that I would like and hope to get at some point. But I'm still just culturally, when I feel it's safe, I'm I'm enjoying the city very much. I went, for instance, recently to see on Broadway. So in college, Stephen Sondheim, right, recently passed, the towering figure of late 20th century American musical theater. In the 70s, a musical he wrote called Company. I stage managed or assistant stage managed a production of it in college. Anyway, long story short, right now on Broadway, there's a production of it that is fabulous and also does a cool gender swap thing where it makes the main character a woman instead of the man that it was written as and conceived as, and it works terrifically, and the cast is fantastic, and it has Patti LuPone in it. Anyway, delightful, tremendous, and only in New York, only on Broadway, phenomenal. I love it. I love going to Central Park. I love my neighborhood, Astoria, Queens, New York. Anyway, yes, so good. Overall good. Awkward as it is for all of us, but I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Great.
I love that you're getting out and going to the theater.
I know. It's
Yeah.
very New York.
Like a real.
I am a theater is in my roots. I did study theater in college. It hasn't remained a significant part of my life throughout my life, but it's certainly something that I still adore, and hope to go see a show
I'm a
every now and
season
then.
ticket holder to the Carol one-woman shows.
Yeah.
I used to be privy to in the office, so I'm well worth it. I'm just loving that you're getting to see some cool stuff. But we miss talking to you every week.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk this week.
Yes.
Sorry.
Smooth.
I'm so sorry. All right.
Still got it.
Yep, this is good. You missed so much,
Okay.
Carolyn. So this movie,
Anita?
yeah.
You want to share with us your text about the film?
Oh.
I had not watched it when you texted.
You hadn't watched it then. What did I send?
At that point,
I got it right here. Let me pull it up.
I sent a group text that got
Yeah.
0 response. So that's how. So
Well-
you might all think that we're friends, but we fake it for the podcast because nobody fucking responds to my text.
It was like I was getting ready for bed.
Yeah, of
but,
course.
Anita messaged us a few days ago saying, quote, "I can't stand this fucking dude in the Souvenir. OMG, I'm not gonna make it."
right. And so like I said, I had not seen it yet, but man,
I was not exaggerating.
I enjoyed the movie, but I had the exact same because he's so good.
Oh yeah,
at playing this.
Okay, hold on.
Whoa.
Yeah, no. So just some context that I don't actually have, but this is a movie that people knew about, except for me because I didn't know about it before Ebony suggested it. This was, it was like an indie darling kind of film that was very revered and praised. And she made a sequel to this movie that came out last year, which was also kind of, when I understood that was really weird to make a sequel to a movie like this because that's not normal-ish, but also I kind of love it. I kind of love that happened, and I'm looking forward to seeing the second one. I'm assuming all of us have only watched the first one, yeah?
That is correct. But I am interested in seeing the second one now.
Yeah.
I'm very, very eager to see the sequel now. Yes.
Me too. Okay. So the reason I sent that text, I think is a praising of this film in a lot of ways, right? Where it is, as we said in the intro, it's a young woman who finds herself surrounded by shitty men. Just endlessly, right? Whether it is men that she is trying to, is being interviewed to get into film school, whether she's pitching her movie, whether it's her fucking dad or someone else's dad or this guy that she's dating. And so it's just this onslaught of shit.
Her roommate seems cool.
Yeah.
Not all men, apparently, is Carol's new afraid.
I did not come away from this film with the impression that the men, by and large,
wow.
I think there's a fellow student at the school who seems genuinely concerned about her. I didn't get any impression from the. I didn't get any impression from the guy that the men running the film school I didn't, I did not get that. I thought they were asking very kind of, I thought it was very standard.
Okay, Ebony,
stuff.
did you? I really miss having you on the podcast for this very specific reason.
Because she opens it up and asks the good questions. I'm leaning more towards Caro's end. And I've only seen the movie once, but I think that the type of shitty men that that Julie, is surrounded by, like they were so expertly drawn, so in that circle, it is, every dude, but in the larger circles that she, I'm not expressing myself well, but yeah, I did think, there were some dudes in her circle, like the fellow student, like her roommate, who were not insufferable bores.
Yeah, but I think that's like the margin of error. To me, at least. No, for real. I feel like this film is primarily about this shitty relationship with this guy and the complicated, let's get into that because I think it's expertly the line is walked so perfectly. Yeah. But to me, the environment is a woman in the 80s trying to go through to be a filmmaker and having all of these men be gatekeepers around her and like being aggressive or, lightly, I'm using aggressive sort of dramatically, but even the friend of Patrick who comes over and is like, this is what I think about film school. Like his partner didn't speak at all. Like it was just these very dominant men with a lot of opinions who are the gatekeepers to this career that she is trying, she's young and new in. And so I'm like a little baffled that that you all didn't read that. And I wonder if that's just my own take on
I don't think so.
Because I feel that way a lot.
I don't disagree at all with what you're saying. I think you're absolutely correct. I'm just saying that, in my viewing, the thing that I focused on was the specific environment that she operated in. So for me, it was recognizing and remembering dudes like this from graduate school and the literati, like those kind of circles, like the artistic circles. So I was more concerned with how those kind of environments are incredibly toxic and, just incredibly poisonous and just nauseating and, their transactional relationships. It wasn't so much about gender for me, but that's just the way that, like I'm saying, I didn't see your reading is not wrong. I just was focusing on other stuff.
It's not wrong at all. It's just it's not what I took. It's not what I took. Like I think the questions that the men asked her for that entrance exam where they were, I don't know. I think they just struck me as the kind of rigorous questions a student maybe who's trying to enter a prestigious film school would be asked about their ethic and their work and why they want to tell the stories they want to tell and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That scene did make me a little uncomfortable.
No, and hold on. I think I can break down why I think it's a little bit different than that because you're not wrong. I don't, okay, whatever. We all interpret things differently and that's totally fine. And that's the miracle of filmmaking and storytelling. But
all that crap.
Yeah. But okay, so I think there's something really interesting about how it's filmed. It is two men and her in a giant warehouse for the majority of that scene. And she looks small and shot on a wide. I don't know if that's what happened, but in my brain, my memory of this is that she's like this small figure with these two looming dudes asking her these tough questions that feel more like less tough questions, but more like not curious about her perspective, but more like you're not thinking about this correctly and asking provoking questions around getting her to realize that she needs to get in line with how filmmaking is supposed to be done. I mean, then it opens up to the entire panel where there's one woman on the panel and it's all dudes. And it feels even more aggressive to me because you're the framing of that whole scene is meant for her to be this small, tiny little, out of fish out of water.
And of course, it's intimidating, and of course it's daunting, and of course you're I imagine she'd be terribly nervous because they have all the power and the ability to control whether she's able to pursue what she wants to make her life's work and her career and her art and her artistic vision. But at the same time, weren't you on some level inclined to question why a privileged, like, is it the place of a privileged woman from Knightsbridge to, like, tell the story of the poor dock workers in Sunderland, and like, would she do it justice, or would she like impose, like, just kind of use it in some window dressing-y way to tell a story that's really about her?
Yes, and totally, and you're totally right, and I hear that, and I think that I went to, like, there's this adage in filmmaking or whatever, and creative stuff is like, write what you know, and I think that is a part of the problem. Because the people who are like, who get to write what they know are, the people who are more dominant, So I clicked into that piece as opposed to clicking into the challenging her privilege piece. And so that's, I think, what happened.
I think, anyways, I think it's very complex, and I think it's a tribute to the film in a way that we take all these threads in it, because the characters, even the minor characters, are so well drawn psychologically, and the relationships and the interactions feel so real. And so, let's get to the central relationship in this film, because my God, it is just like the most
excruciating.
Excruciating, but also like insightful portrait. One of the most insightful portraits of a particular type of manipulative behavior and attitude that I have ever seen. So, I did not. So I thought going into this film that it might be similar to this film called An Education, which is a very good film starring like Carey Mulligan and Peter Sarsgaard. A young woman, drawn to an older man who's like, obviously, who of course does shitty things and manipulates his power as a man in society to, kind of pull the wool over her eyes. And it's a great, very insightful coming of age story that has so much to say about, gender dynamics and so on and so forth. But what I didn't know going into this film is that a major part of what makes it so complicated is that Anthony is a heroin addict. So he works at the foreign service, the foreign
office. Mm-hmm.
Foreign office. And, the way that, let's start here. Like, the scene that I think is most emblematic of, and this is a thing where I think people, not just young women who have had relationships with older men, but I think people who have had all kinds of relationships with addicts in their lives, whether it's a parent or an adult and a grown child or a sibling or whatever, will be able to relate to this dynamic. There is a scene in which, Anthony does something terrible. He admits that he did it, but like by the end of the scene, like he has her apologizing to him.
It's incredible.
It's like incredible, right? And watching that, like, just, I have not spent like that much time. I have had a major addict in my life at one point, but just the truthfulness of that dynamic and the way it plays out and the way you watch it happen and how it gets to that point, and it's like, on one hand you're like, why are you apologizing to him? But at the same time, you totally understand how he's done it and how he's like twisted her into that position. It is an amazing scene. And like the whole relationship kind of, is like that, in that he, like very early on, he's almost a little bit, I would say, has a little bit of what you might call pickup artist energy, because like in the way that he quote unquote kind of negs her, I remember very early on in their time together, something he says is like, "You're lost and you always will be," and he kind of walks this line at times of being both like very dismissive of her her ideas about film and her and the things she wants to do, but then being like praising just enough, or to kind of like be this like slippery figure who sometimes you can come to for the comfort, and sometimes like just will treat you so coldly, and it's all because, you know, and it's all because it's all tied into his addiction in a way, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think the actor who plays Anthony, Tom Burke, does such a masterful job, because it would have been very easy to, you know, sort of moonwalk into a mustache twirling kind of villain, a villainous portrayal of Anthony, but he doesn't do that. You can easily see in certain key scenes why he's so charming at some level, how his, like, you know, dismissal of Julie's opinions and her reactions, how it's coached in such a way, or, you know, it's framed in such a way that it's seductive, you know, because it's like, no, you're not seeing this in the right way. No, you know, you're not expressing this way. Why are you planning to do this, et cetera, negging her, as you say, Carol, but nevertheless expressing just enough seemingly like fascination with her that it's magnetic, you know? And so I find it interesting, like, in the very beginning of the film, I mean, like, I knew what kind of dude Anthony was when we see him at the very beginning at that party in the flat, and he's talking to this Black woman, and I think he's asking her if she wants to move in because his usual roommate is rarely there. And she said, you know, as long as your roommate will be okay with it. And he says, yeah, I told him about you, that you were kind of a wild child and exotic. And I was like, I have this guy's fucking number.
Oh,
there were
100%.
millions of them, you know, at grad school parties, and just like the endless smoking and the world weariness that is so, you can only get away with that with people who have not experienced as much. Like, it's vital that Julie is younger than he is, and that she is not as worldly as he is, which is not to say that she's naive in any way, but I think, you know, she just hasn't been around his type of person long enough to immediately see what he's doing, and that he's bad news from the beginning. But yeah, I just want to shout out Tom Burke, because he was I was like physically repulsed by him, and it's just a testament to how good he was at that portrayal.
Earlier I said Patrick when I meant Anthony, just for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think Patrick was the character played by Richard Ayoade, the one who's like, so I'm just wondering, like the one who eventually reveals, like, how did the two of you come together? How did you tessellate?
When we see them sitting in that giant, like, you know, old school looking hall, and he's like, are they more real than me? Am I more real than you? I was like, oh fuck. Like I immediately was like, I don't know if I can handle this movie. And I think, you know, we started with the text that I sent, because that what you both are expressing is how, like, subtly and deliberately and carefully this narrative is crafted to show how the manipulation works in a way that is still very sympathetic to her. Right. And I think that can be hard to do, where, like, there, you know, she takes him back after he robs her, and you're like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But also you're like, you kind of are like, yeah, it's really hard to get out. It's hard to, like, you know, feelings are real. And when
you love an addict, you always, or not always, maybe you do eventually maybe get to that point where you realize that it's never going to change. But it's very common and very understandable to have that hope in you that, like, okay, maybe this time it's going to be different. Maybe they're not going to relapse, or they're not going to behave that way anymore. You know, you so want to believe, right? That maybe if now that because he loves me, and he must love me more than he loves the heroin. Right. So, you know, he'll do it. He'll be better now.
And they've shared that profound intimacy too, because I think at the point where she takes him back after the robbery, is that after she's watched him go through withdrawal?
Yeah, it's because then
I can't remember the order, but like when you share those moments with someone and you see them at their most vulnerable, yes, and I think it's admirable in a way. It's, you know, ultimately, you know, futile when you're working or, you know, dealing with addicts, but it is ultimately so human to say, like, I've seen this person at rock bottom, I cannot leave them. I know how hard it is. And I mean, the film is sort of unflinching. It doesn't, linger too long over Anthony in the throes of withdrawal, but you see the grossness of it, I mean, just like the shaking, the trembling, the vomit. I mean, just, the fluids on him,
gross. Yeah,
and when you've seen someone in that condition, you are so now connected on a deep level to their sobriety, to their life, to their continued life, And so it's incredibly difficult. And like I said, it would have been easy and in the hands of a lesser director and a lesser actor to paint Tom as this irredeemable villain that we, are unable to empathize with completely. And we are baffled by Julie's, her attraction to him. But the film grants us and Julie the grace to say, we understand why you would make these choices. They're poor choices, but we get it.
Yeah. And I do want to call that out a little bit in terms of like the other perspective of this, of like not just the drug addict piece, but the manipulation piece, which, obviously is related. But, what you're talking about is like Julie is kind of young and a little bit naive and a little bit inexperienced. And like I think that at that age and at that moment in her life, she can't see the manipulation. And I think it's brilliant to show us as the audience that that's happening. You see it immediately at the very beginning, where he's kind of a dick to her. And she's just like, that's like, this is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what this hetero relationship is like and what to expect. And he's older, so he must know more. And he has this like established job and he's so worldly and all that. And so the normalizing of that kind of manipulation to the point where near the end, she actually she had kicked him out for being a junkie. And then when he comes back, she says she hasn't been nice to him and that she's been a beast to him. And you're just, your heart is breaking because she has been so beaten down. Beaten down's not actually the right metaphor that I want to use here, but there's like a kind of grinding that happens where like she has correlated her feelings for this person with manipulation. And I think without realizing that that's what it is, right? For a lot of folks who are in abusive situations similar to this, they don't realize it until they're out of it, or they have another romantic interaction that is actually healthy. And they're like, holy fuck, I didn't know it could be this way. Right. And there's something for me as someone who's like experienced that kind of relationship, like it's so hard for me to watch because it's asking, like for me, very personally, it's asking me to relive that, right? And watch it. And there's a part of me that's like, this is really hard. And like Carolyn, as you're saying, like you've lived with an addict, right? Like there's something really hard about watching that and like kind of being asked to relive it, and something so gratifying and beautiful about the accuracy of it. Right. In a world in which we don't get that kind of accuracy to our experiences.
Exactly. Like it is remarkable. I mean, to within, a 2-hour film to write these characters so precisely that like someone like me, someone like you, can look at a scene, the way a dynamic plays out, the way a character is shifted, is feeling wrong for the perfectly reasonable things that they have done and felt and said. It's remarkable. I mean, it's the craft is tremendous.
Yeah, and I want to call out a one particular example of the like filmmaking that I noted because it was just so breathtaking to me. Is there's a scene where so she's upstairs and she hears this big crash and he's you hear a crash. She comes downstairs. She sees him in like utter disarray. But like he's like punching the glass. He's like everything is torn up. He's bleeding. Like all this shit is happening. You don't really see as much of the chaos, but like you get what's happening. The next scene cuts to the two of them with, I believe, her parents sitting around the table. And there's a shot where everyone is like being friendly and nice and cordial. And like there's a different angle that you see where the glass is broken. And you don't see the glass broken in the scene with the heated moment. You see it in the calmness and the tranquility of like, this violence and this addiction and this manipulation is always present, even in
and no one's going to
moments.
mention it. Yep.
And no one's
no one mentions it. It's just in the background.
Yeah. And I thought that was beautiful.
It's
like
so,
just
so
such
effective.
a choice.
Yeah. God.
Can we go back to the scene that you were both talking about when Julie is sort of, in front of that firing line of, inquisitors asking her, like, why do you want to do a film that's so far from your own life experiences? And wouldn't it be actually more radical to focus on things that are closer to you and everything? Because, that scene made me really uncomfortable because even though I recognize that many of the questions that were being posed were important questions for any artist to ask themselves, it made me uncomfortable in that scene, Anita, going back to what you were saying about like the gender wonkiness, the disparity in power in those scenes. Because I was like, how often are male artists asked that question? Sure. Certainly not as often. And it's not demanded of male artists in any field.
Yeah. I guess that's it.
To write solely about what they know, but it is demanded of people of color and it is demanded of women, as if that is the only way that we can create the art.
So, yes, I think there's something to be said. There's this idea of the male experience is treated as universal. The female experience is seen as gendered or as particular. And I actually think that's part of what's remarkable about this film and the fact that it has a sequel, which again I have not yet watched. Is here we have a lauded female filmmaker, who does have roots in the avant-garde, who comes from the art space. Joanna Hogg is like in the 80s is like, Tilda Swinton back then was just pure like, working with like Derek Jarman. Anyway, like very, like kind of avant-garde, radical, like truly radical filmmakers, challenging structure, challenging notions of form. And I love how this film is not, it's not conventional narrative structure in that it's like, it really cares about us following the through line of the plot 3 months later, 6 months later. It doesn't do that. Right. It just trusts us to follow the flow. Anyway, but so I only watched the trailer for the part 2, the Souvenir part 2. And at one point in the trailer, as it's showing like quotes from critics who praise the film, one of the quotes is, and it's Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian. It says it's something like, the quote is something like, a wonderful portrait of the filmmaker as a young woman. And which is clearly a reference, the critic there is referencing the James Joyce novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And that just made me think like, wow, so often, again, like the male artist experience, the male experience in general, again, treated as universal. And I think with stories like this, like, although yes, it's very much about like a young woman with an older man and the kind of that dynamic that I'm sure is familiar to so many women, and being that particular coming of age experience and so on. I do think there's something, even if it's not structurally radical, this film, even if it's not like radical in its form or in its structure, just the way that stories like this, I think, do work in a way to try to universalize the female experience in the same way that male experience is so often universalized, in a sense of like, to just like any viewer should be able to kind of, we're aligned with Julie. We should be anyway in watching this. And like that shouldn't be radical. It shouldn't, but and I think it still is. It still does press against the status quo in some important way. And so anyway, I just think that's...
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess the thing that bothered me about that scene is the way that it seemed implicit that women shouldn't even have access to imagination. So you are not even allowed to imagine telling another story, because the only real, the only true, the only possible story, the only possible art that you can create, must arrive out of self. But for men, and white men in particular, they are allowed to envision anything, So it was just, one.
Completely. I mean, we don't know for sure that they don't ask those questions of the young men, but certainly just historically, yes, like absolutely. I mean, of course, it's so true. I do love that we get to hear a little like analysis. And there's a scene where they're like, I don't know, workshopping some scene or whatever, and one of the heads of the film school starts talking about like Psycho, and we get to hear a little like analysis of Hitchcock's technique and stuff. I love it when films are about film a little bit, and this film has some really good like stuff about film and filmmaking in it that I really enjoyed.
I also liked that there's the scene where she just like is fucking up on set. Like she's just like doesn't know what she's doing. And I think there's something so valuable about seeing that, especially as this is like, it is semi-autobiographical of a very like dear filmmaker that's highly respected, that like we all start somewhere like learning and knocking over a fucking light and not knowing how to make a decision. And like, that like, I think that there's something very honest and beautiful about demonstrating that.
Completely. I mean, and I saw this video rant go, make the rounds on Twitter yesterday, where it's a guy from some podcast or something. I don't know what the source is. Sorry. But, talking about like how there needs to be funding for people in the arts so that they can make their really shitty first film and second film, shitty second film and shitty third film or whatever, so that they can get to the point where they can start, being good and better and growing and doing the stuff that's actually valuable or whatever. But like, but so often what happens is, like the funding just isn't there. Somebody like and their first work doesn't get picked up or looked at because it's amateur, it's shitty, and then that's it. Like that's the end.
And that's film school. Like I mean, and you have to pay to go to film school usually, but like that's part of film school is like that's where you go and bake all your mistakes and do everything bad, so you don't have to put that into the world. But like that is very limiting. A lot of people can't go to film school. What if you're older? What if you don't have the money? What if what if? So like that would be so cool to have that in all, sorry, I just rolled my eyes because I'm like, that's such a bigger thing about like funding the arts in general, right? Which is infuriating.
And I mean, Patrick is right about that in the movie when he says like, what is the point of film school? Like these people are just churning out filmmakers who are like themselves, like it's something that you get stamped. It's something that you do. But if you're a filmmaker, you make films. So
I definitely.
What are you waiting for?
I appreciated his rants about art, or like him bringing up. I
did too, but I will say that I add him to my list of like men talking down. Yeah, because I actually this is because I've been talking about this. Like, well, actually, dudes, often the ones in my life, because I have a lot of them in my life, or recovering well, actually, dudes. Like tend to be really fucking smart and tend to have like really good points and like, whatever. They just are fucking dicks about how they communicate it, right? So that was another scene to me where I'm like, oh, this guy is really smart and he's saying smart things, but he's a fucking domineering dick and like doesn't let anyone else talk. And I don't, that's how I read it, which is based on my experiences and my perspective and all that, like, whatever. But it was one of those, that's it. My point is.
Oh, yeah. And I watched that scene thinking like, Richard Ayoade is so beautiful. And with that coat that he was wearing, it wasn't a fur coat, but it was just this very like kind of Jimi Hendrix-y kind of statement coat and that great hair. And I think he had eyeliner on too. And he's offering these just like, prophet on high, outsider, guru kind of pronouncements. And I was just like, I would have gotten so high at a party in graduate school and listened to every bon mot out of this idiot's mouth, and I would have fallen in love. And he wouldn't have had any time for me. And I would have just been obsessed with this guy. And it would have taken me like 6 years to realize what an asshole he was. But this film was, there was a really painful kind of nostalgia to me because there's a lot of these dudes in old Ev's history. I just barely made it out.
If we all, like, because there's this thing where we're all like, yeah, when we were dumb, we did these things or we didn't know any better. And I was like, man, is that just a product of like being young and being in all these shitty relationships? And I was about to say something like, man, like that, like we just have to go through it and learn. And I was like, no, we fucking don't. We can not be harmful to people. Like we can have bad relationships that are not predicated on harm and abuse. Like we need to teach young people about accountability and about harm prevention and about like, you know, like all of that shit. So I just wanted to share that journey that I just went on in those 2 seconds. To be like, it can be better. We don't have to accept this as a norm for young people or like, or people new to relationships, romantic relationships. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention the music a little bit in this, because I think, so I am confusing the music in a movie I watched last night with the music in this movie, but I do remember, remember thinking that like, that the music signaled, like had some signaling to it as well, right? Where she'd be listening to like, there's this opening scene there's an early scene where she's listening to something like punk or like 80s rock kind of, and the screen is split where he's in the kitchen with like an apron on and she's just in the living room listening to music, and there's a disconnect. Like there's this feeling of like this music is too young for him, or like he's kind of annoyed or something like that. And then it cuts to another scene where they're sitting around listening to like classical music or opera or something like that. And I thought that the music was creating a signal of like kind of taming her and shaping and grooming her to be what he wants her to be.
Oh yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Because she has turned off his opera to play her music. But then later when we hear the opera, like she has stopped asserting herself in that way. And so when there's a later scene where you have the split screen, he's in this like long kind of kingly robe and she's also in a robe, you know?
Yeah.
Like even visually, he started to, sort of wear away what makes her different.
Totally. I have a note that says, why is he wearing a Napoleon jacket? Because he was wearing
questions.
Like he kept wearing that jacket and then he was wearing it around his PJ. It was so perfect. Like this movie is so fucking good. And I wonder too, like there's so many things I recognize in this because I either experience them or I'm familiar with abuse or like these sorts of patterns, and I can see these subtle things, right? Like I can identify that music or the tension or whatever. And I wonder how much I miss in movies about things I don't understand with these subtle cues, right? Like, which I think are beautiful and wonderful and part of the depth of filmmaking. And now I'm just like, man, how much am I missing? Because I just don't know things. So, all right. Yeah. I'm really excited to watch the next movie. I need a break from it a little bit because I feel like this was very heavy for me. But I'm like so curious to see the trajectory and the arc of that. Like the other thing I'll say about this movie is that it's very character driven. And like it's not like there's no plot and no conflict or whatever, but it's very character driven, and so I'm very curious about like what that looks like in a sort of surviving this moment in this relationship and growing in this character's career, you know?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, yeah. All right, we will be right back.
Awesome.
We all need a little emotional support from time to time, but don't always have the resources or access to the support that understands us. I know it would have been life-changing if during the height of the online abuse against me to have anyone else who understood what I was going through. That's why me and my team built the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. We provide free, confidential, emotional support for people who make and play games. Because we are people who make and play games too, and we get it. You can learn more by texting info to 23368 from anywhere in the US or visit gameshotline.org. That's info to 23368 or gameshotline.org. Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. CAROLYN, do you have a freak out?
I do.
Hell yeah.
I was debating between I actually have two wolves inside me right now, as we all do, the two wolves. There is the film wolf and the book wolf.
I mean,
But,
you can do both, Carolyn. You can
all
do
right.
both. I give you
Well,
permission.
Thank you,
Let the
Anita.
wolves be friends.
Yes. Okay. Well, first one is a book which I forgot I was going to be on the show this week, and I've been telling people left and right about this book, anyone I can get to listen, because it's one of those books where it's like, oh my God, I have to tell everyone about this book because it's so good. I can't stop thinking about it. So I already freaked out about it too, Anita, but I'll freak out about it now.
I know. I got a private freak out.
Yeah,
I felt so special.
So this book, the book is called The Gentrification of the Mind, Witness to a Lost Imagination. It's by Sarah Schulman. It was originally published in 2013, so it's not like a brand new book. Sarah Schulman, if folks don't know, is a tremendous writer of queer, lesbian fiction in the 80s. She wrote, and 90s. And anyway, she's wrote landmark books, including like Girls, Visions, and Everything, After Dolores. Anyway, really important fiction writer, but also a nonfiction writer who has written about, a great many things. But here in this book, so she it's one of those books where it's a slim volume. It's like less than 200 pages, and yet it's about so much in that 180 pages or whatever it is that I struggle to even figure out how to articulate. The ideas in it make my brain feel like it's expanding as I try to hold them in my head, because they're so phenomenal and so obviously right in my mind, and yet it's hard to condense. So she grew up, she lived in New York City in the early 80s when the AIDS crisis exploded. She watched her friends who were gay male artists get sick and die by the dozens. And she saw the whole queer, arts subculture of New York basically almost essentially get eradicated by AIDS, and then by the gentrification of the neighborhoods in which those people had lived, that was, very helped along by the AIDS crisis, as these people just, from out of state who had completely different values and who lived on a completely different economic tier, swooped in, bought the apartments, the rents skyrocketed, the whole culture of the neighborhoods changed, and a whole, in Schulman's view, and she makes the argument so beautifully and so persuasively and so heartbreakingly with that, we lost not only the lives of all those people, which are of course just incalculable in the devastation of that loss, but also a whole way of thinking, oppositionally and in truly kind of radical ways that were often expressed through art, because capitalism, she says, that kind of paved the way for capitalism to smooth over, a lot of rough edges, to sort of integrate the whole American theater scene, to make it a tool of capitalism. And she talks about how yes, maybe, and this is, again, she's writing in 2013. I don't know how she would frame this or think how she thinks about it now, or how the data has changed, but she talks about how even in the 80s, yes, queer literature is often more on the margins, but it had the room to be truly radical and explicit, and in its ideas, as political ideas, as well as its sexuality. And she's now, in the late 2000s, the early 2010s, it's all the queer women I know who are established writers, they don't put their queerness into the fiction that they write, because they can't, because they won't, it wouldn't be published if they did. Or so it's this interesting, what has been lost by, as a result of AIDS and gentrification, and not just in terms of human life, but ideologically. And there's so much fascinating stuff in it about power dynamics and capitalism and art and queerness and feminism and everything. It's a really lively and colorful, gripping, read. It's not a dry academic book. It's very compelling. Okay.
That sounds amazing.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wrote it. Thank you.
I wrote it. I know. I'll tell Sarah next time I see Sarah. I'll tell her you said that. No, but I really encourage people to. I think it's a genuinely important book that is also like compelling to read. Not some just like, yes. The other thing I wanted to freak out about. It's Oscar season. So I briefly mentioned this on my last appearance during the Benedetta episode, but it's now playing in 100 cities across the country. It got nominated for Best Picture, everyone. Yay! Drive my car!
It's so good.
It's
Holy
so
fuck.
And to be honest, Anita, I wasn't sure you would love it.
It's so good.
I'm glad. I'm glad you like it. But it's again, I can't stop thinking about it. But it's a film that it's interesting on so many levels. But let me just highlight this about it, I guess. Maybe, and so it's 3 hours, and so the first 40 minutes basically is all kind of set up. But and then it's say at roughly the 30 or 40 minute mark, a thing happens that. You might think, oh, this is tropey. This is going to be about a dude, in a kind of tropey way. And it winds up not being that at all. It's such a human and story about connection and life and what makes life worth living. And there's the use of theater. So the main character is a theater director. And his whole thing is technique basically is that he casts actors from, who speak different languages, actors from different parts, different regions of the world, in the same play, and they will speak in their native tongue, and the audience follows along through what are called super titles, the dialogue projected, above the stage for those people who they don't understand. And so, you have this play in the film, Uncle Vanya, which is, in my view, one of the just timelessly great films about plays about what it is to be a living human being and suffer and endure and find comfort in each other's presence. And you have it, being acted out through actors who, are not all speaking the same language. One of them uses Korean Sign Language. And, just somehow the metaphor of this, these characters suffering and persevering and struggling together, while the actors are speaking different languages, it to me is this just tremendously beautiful thing in and of itself. But then the way the film kind of contextualizes that in the lives of the central character and this young woman who drives his car for reasons that aren't important here. It's just, and the filmmaking, it's so gentle, it's so meditative in terms of there's very little camera movement, and it will just linger, and there's so much beauty in it, in coasts, and just watching the beautiful red Saab that he owns, glide along highways and through cityscapes at night and everything.
The character, the car is another character.
The car is another character, It kind of represents in a way this insulated life that he has lived because his wife dies, but he's still in the car as an actor. He'll still recite lines with recordings that his wife made when she was alive. And so the car kind of in a way, you can view it in so many ways. It kind of symbolizes this insulated life that he creates for himself after she dies and all this stuff. But despite this kind of gentleness in its tone, it's also it has a profound, it's moving in a way that's really deep. It's not it's kind of a serene film in a way, but not dull. There are deep emotions, at play here. It's just not a really, a film that on the surface is struggling to make you feel something so many blockbusters do. But you really do get pulled into it, and you really feel something as you watch this film.
It is remarkable to me that it is a 3-hour movie that I feel like fully 100% is earned.
Right.
Like whatever. We can talk about like the movies and stuff, but like I very rarely do I want to sit through a fucking 3-hour movie, right? Like that just feels very long. And this movie, I was like, oh, you earned it. Like you deserve every fucking minute that you took. And there are these just like these epic sort of monologue, like conversation scenes that you're just riveted by, and you're just like present, and you're like, yes. I want to sit and watch you have this conversation on a fucking mountaintop, like because the performances are amazing, and like what they're saying and the emotion of them. Like I'm like, yes, you can have 10 minutes or 20 minutes just in this one conversation, and that's totally great and fine and wonderful. So I wasn't sure what I would think of the movie, because there is a little bit of like, Carolyn, I remember you being like, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is your kind of movie, but I loved it. My, a mutual friend of Carolyn and I's, we went together, and he is very film snobby, and he, his traditionally, when you can kind of see a plot point coming, he gets bored, right? He's like, that sucks that I knew that. And in this movie, he was like, I saw a lot of this coming and I loved it. Like it was so okay that happened. And it was the thing that should have happened. And I think that's, I don't know, coming from him as someone that I go see movies with a lot, like really, I feel like was very high praise of like, you don't have to reinvent anything when you're making a movie. You just have to do it with so much heart and like storytelling gusto, and like it just drive my car. I'm so glad it was nominated, and I highly recommend folks check it out as well. So just adding to the praise. Okay. I went to see Sid and Nancy, the 1986 movie about Sid and Nancy, Sid of the Sex Pistols. And that is a movie that I had seen as a teenager because I was obsessed with Courtney Love. And so I obviously watched it because she's in it. She's bad. She's very bad in it.
Wait. Am I thinking of a different film? No,
she doesn't star it. No.
Okay, it's because it's Gary Oldman and...
It's Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Which is interesting because while we were waiting for the movie to start, I was reading the IMDb trivia, and Gary Oldman was like, I fucking hated playing this role. I hate punk rock. I hate everything about it. You're just like, holy shit, man. Despite that, I think Gary Oldman is a fucking incredible actor. And he was incredible in this. Both him and Chloe Webb, I think, were really sensational. Part of the reason why I'm sharing it is because I feel like there is something so special about this movie that I probably will never watch again, because it is so textual, or not textual like texts, but textual like the texture of the world, right? Like the dirt.
Yeah.
It is a dirty fucking movie.
Yeah.
It is grime. It is like suffering. It is euphoria. It is like just devastating. It's devastation, like orbiting a love story. And I think it's so, I don't see a lot of movies that just feel where you just kind of feel gross the whole fucking time you're watching it. And they're like, I feel like that's a testament to the filmmaking and of like what they were trying to get across. It's directed by Alex Cox. And one of the reasons I was also interested is because I have been listening to, so Roger Deakins is the cinematographer on this. It was one of his earlier films. And Roger Deakins is a very famous cinematographer that's worked with the Coen brothers, did 1917 and the new Blade Runner and on. He is probably one of the most famous cinematographers. And I was curious because I've been listening to his podcast about filmmaking, where him and his wife, James Deakins, who works together on all of their films, talks to filmmakers about their experiences. And so like other cinematographers and directors and actors and production designers and ADs, and just talking about like what those roles mean and what their experiences are. And like, if you're interested in film at all, I highly recommend it. I think there's some amazing conversations and insights and intrigue that happens from the podcast. So that was part of my interest in seeing this, is like looking at it with that lens, like the more of a filmmaking lens. And man, it's gritty, like, and not gritty in the sort of bullshit Batman way, but like real. I will say when we came out of the theater and we were talking about it, one of my friends was like, man, like I was never into punk rock, and like this feels like and never did hard drugs or anything, and like it feels like a window into a world that I will never get to experience. And to me, as someone who grew up punk rock, like grew up in punk rock music venues and culture and whatever as a teenager, like I was like, but this doesn't feel like punk to me. This feels like drug addiction, right? Like yes, the clubs do feel like that, and they do have that like violent, ragey, young angst and whatever. But it doesn't feel like a movie about punk rock as much as it feels like a movie about like chaotic drug addiction. So lots of parallels. The music is really interesting in it. Lots of parallels to the Souvenir in terms of drug addiction stuff. So yeah, anyways, if that's what I did last night. Okay. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Carolyn, I miss you. Like every time you come on, I'm like, oh God, I love your insight, and I love what you bring to these conversations. So thank you for making time for us occasionally. I know you will be back on next season for a very special episode, so folks can stay tuned for that in some months in the future. Where can folks find you, or is there anything you're doing that you want to plug?
No, I mean, I work for Kotaku.com, but I mostly, I get to write stuff occasionally, but I'm an editor, and so my byline is not on the site too often because I have a lot of work to do just as an editor. But anyway, follow me on Twitter if you're not already. You can follow me at Carolyn Michelle, and when I do write things or just, I constantly tweet my opinions about film and games and other stuff. So if you want more of that, just follow me on Twitter.
Awesome. All right, y'all, join us next week for the last episode of the season, which will be featuring another female-directed film with another guest. And you know what that means. It means we don't know what it is yet. To be fair, we are recording this like a month early, so we have a month to figure this out. All right, our show is engineered by Rob Pera. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.